An 18-year-old walked into the Great Smoky Mountains and vanished. No tracks, no gear, no signal. For 11 days, hundreds of rescuers, helicopters, and canine units searched over 500,000 acres of wilderness and found absolutely nothing. His own stepfather couldn't explain what happened. Or maybe he wouldn't. What rangers eventually uncovered changed the entire search. But by then, this teenager was already fighting for his life, completely alone, starving, and heading deeper into the wild in the wrong direction. This is the story of Austin Bohannon. Austin wasn't your average 18-year-old. While most kids his age were glued to their phones, he was out exploring ridgelines and creek beds. He'd grown up loving the outdoors, spent years hiking, and had more wilderness experience than people twice his age. So when his stepdad Hubert suggested a trip into Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Austin didn't hesitate. They'd hiked there before. They knew the trails. It felt routine. But this trip had a purpose neither of them wanted to talk about. They parked, geared up, and headed deep into the backcountry, far from the marked trails and the usual tourist paths. For a while, everything was fine. The forest was thick, the terrain was steep, but they'd handled worse. Then, near a creek crossing, everything fell apart. Hubert slipped on a wet rock. He caught his balance, but his eyeglasses flew off his face and landed in the rushing water. Without them, Hubert was practically blind. The trail ahead was steep, narrow, and dangerous. There was no way he could keep going without his glasses. Austin didn't even think twice. He jumped into the creek and started feeling around with his feet, trying to locate the glasses underwater. Hubert followed him in. The two of them splashed and searched, but the current was stronger than they expected. Because Hubert could barely see, he didn't realize he was drifting farther and farther from Austin. By the time he stopped and looked around, his stepson was gone. He called out, again and again. Nothing. Just the sound of water and wind through the trees. Austin Bohannon had disappeared. Here's where things get strange. Hubert didn't report Austin missing that day. He didn't report it the next day either. It took 2 full days before Park Chief Ranger Steve Kloster received the call. And when he finally sat down with Hubert to hear the story, something about it didn't sit right. Kloster had been a ranger for over 20 years, with more than 522,000 acres of rugged wilderness under his watch. He'd handled dozens of missing person cases. People got lost in these mountains all the time, but this one was different. Hubert's story had gaps. He couldn't remember exactly where they'd been hiking. He was vague about the timeline, and he refused to explain why they'd gone so far off the main trails in the first place. Why would 2 hikers wander miles into unmarked backcountry with no clear destination? Kloster launched a full-scale search anyway. Trained canine units swept the forest. Helicopters equipped with infrared cameras flew grid patterns over the canopy. Boats patrolled the rivers. The Tennessee Emergency Management Agency sent additional teams. Hundreds of rescuers combed through some of the most remote terrain in the eastern United States. They found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of clothing. Nothing. What do you think Hubert was hiding? Drop your guess in the comments right now, because what Kloster discovered next changed everything. As the days ticked past 1 week, Kloster pulled Hubert aside for a direct conversation. No more gentle questions. A young man's life was at stake, and the ranger was done being patient. He pressed harder. Why were you out there? What were you really doing? Where exactly were you? Hubert finally broke. They hadn't been hiking for fun. They'd gone into the park to harvest wild ginseng. The root of the ginseng plant can sell for up to $600 a pound, driven by massive demand from the health supplement industry. The problem was that harvesting it inside a national park is a federal crime. Hubert had been terrified of admitting the truth because it meant confessing to illegal poaching on protected land. His fear of getting in trouble had cost rescuers an entire week. Kloster seized the ginseng Hubert had collected and set it on his desk. But he wasn't thinking about the crime. He was thinking about Austin. Now that he knew the real reason they were out there, he could finally pinpoint which trails and creek systems they'd likely followed. He called in expert guides who knew those specific areas and redeployed search teams to a much narrower zone. He's young. He's in shape, Kloster told his team, and there's water all over out there. He still believed Austin could be alive. But privately, He admitted he'd never seen a search stretch this long without finding something, anything, in over 2 decades on the job. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, Austin was alone and running out of time. The moment he realized he was separated from Hubert, Austin made a decision that probably saved his life. He didn't panic. He stopped, took a breath, and started thinking. Step one was to find high ground. He pulled himself up a steep ridge, hoping to catch a cell signal. When he finally looked at his phone, there was nothing. No bars, no connection. He stared at the screen and felt his stomach drop. All he wanted was to call his mom, to tell her he was okay, but out here he was completely cut off from the world. By the next morning, he shifted to plan B, water. He climbed back down and followed a creek, letting gravity guide him downhill toward the base of the mountain. He found water he could drink. But he'd made a critical mistake without realizing it. He'd been walking for 2 days in the wrong direction. He was now deeper in the wilderness than when he'd started. He had to turn around. But by then, every direction looked the same. Thick forest, steep ridges, no landmarks. He picked a direction and kept moving. The nights were the hardest. Temperatures dropped. He had no shelter, no fire, and no food. He curled up on the forest floor and tried to sleep, shivering, listening to every sound in the darkness. The first few days, the hunger was constant, a gnawing ache that never let up. Then, after about day 4, it just stopped. His body had shifted into survival mode. He knew what that meant. He was running out of time. One afternoon, he heard the low thrum of helicopter blades overhead. He looked up through the trees and saw it scanning the canopy. They were searching for him. He waved. He shouted. But the forest was too dense. They couldn't see him. The helicopter moved on. He stood there, arms still raised, watching it disappear. He kept walking. Back home, his mother was barely holding on. She hadn't slept in days. She sat by the phone, waiting, praying, refusing to believe the worst, even as others quietly began to accept it. Closter himself was beginning to prepare for the possibility that this search might not have a happy ending. He sent out one final round of teams. They came back empty-handed, again. Then came day 11. Austin was following a river, exhausted, skeletal, and barely able to keep his legs moving. And then, up ahead, he saw movement on the water. Kayaks, a small boat, a man and his daughter, out for a day on the river. Austin waved his arms and shouted with everything he had left. The man on the boat looked over and knew immediately. He'd seen the news. He'd seen the missing posters. He was looking at the boy the entire state had been searching for. Austin Bohannon was alive. He was airlifted to a hospital, severely dehydrated and malnourished, having lost significant weight over the 11 days. But he was breathing. He was conscious. And when his mother finally saw him, she collapsed into him and didn't let go. Hubert faced federal charges related to the illegal ginseng harvesting. The 2-day delay in reporting Austin missing remains one of the most criticized decisions in the case. Ranger Closter later said that if Hubert had come forward immediately and honestly, they likely would have found Austin within the first 48 hours. Austin survived because he refused to give up. No food for 11 days. No shelter. No fire. Just a teenager alone in 500,000 acres of wilderness, who decided every single morning to stand up and keep walking. If Austin's story reminded you that quitting is never the answer, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment and tell me, could you survive 11 days alone in the wild? I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.